Hello there. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar about Kresge's Education Program. I'm Krista Yankee, and I will be serving as today's moderator. I'm going to run through a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your phones are in listen-only mode and will remain muted throughout our call. We are recording today's webinar and will share the recording with you in the coming days so you can access it for further viewing. And we will save 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes, ideally, at the end of today's webinar to take your questions. If you look on the GoToWebinar rail on the right side of your page, there's a place to enter those, and you can do so at any time. But we will save them for the end. Joining me on today's webinar are members of Kresge's Education Program. Bill Moses is the team's managing director and has been with Kresge for more than 20 years. And he's also joined by Bethany Miller, a program officer on the education team. The team's rounded out by our colleagues Caroline Altman-Smith, who's our deputy director, and Rebecca Villarreal, a program officer. And they unfortunately could not be with us today. And we also just want to take a moment to introduce you to our extended team, some other colleagues at Kresge who support the education team's work. Kim Dempsey is a social investment officer here at Kresge, the deputy director actually of our social investment team, and she works with the education program to help it find impact investing opportunities. Brandy Donia and Annalise Huber also support the team and are partners with administrative support and grants management support respectively. And again, I'm Krista, and I'm the communication officer at Kresge who supports the team with all things communications. And now I will turn it over to Bill, who will start by giving us a brief background on the foundation.
Hello, thank you, Krista. This is Bill Moses. I'm managing director for the Kresge Education team. The Kresge Foundation, and thank you, by the way, for all of you calling in from all across the country and from South Africa. The Kresge Foundation is a private foundation established in 1924, and our founder, Sebastian Kresge, gave his first gift to create the foundation with the goal to support human progress. Today, that original gift has grown to about $3.8 billion in assets, and our mission is to expand opportunity for low-income people in America's cities. We do that through investing about $150 million a year through grants and social investments through 6 programs and 2 practice areas. Now, one of the things that sets us apart from our peer funders in the post-secondary world is the fact that we are from a foundation that has a number of different programmatic areas and areas of expertise. So you can see our 6 programs here. We have arts and culture, Detroit, education, of course, environment, health, human services. These are the main programs we have at the foundation. We also have 2 things that we call practices, which are overarching departments that serve to help all of the programs do a better job. And that includes American Cities Practice, which is looking at how we can all land in cities and support urban issues more effectively across the foundation, and Social Investments Practice, which looks at program-related investments, which might be things like loans or loan guarantees or equity investments that are put into nonprofit organizations. One thing that's important to remember before you maybe shut off your phone if you decide that there's not a good fit here is to keep in mind that while you might not fit Kresge's education work, it's possible that you might fit arts and culture or the environment team or health or human services. So just keep in mind that it may be worth looking at some of those teams' web pages to get a feel for their work, because maybe you're actually a better fit with them than you are with us. So I think a question that's really important for us is to give you a sense of why we fund post-secondary education and why we prioritize this pretty much as the exclusive area of our funding in education at Kresge. And there are a couple of things here. First is that college graduates enjoy a $1 million lifetime earnings premium over high school graduates alone. If you're a community college graduate, that lifetime earning is about $250,000. That's a huge difference that allows you to save money, gives you a cushion against bad times, allows you to invest more in your children and in your household. And so it's really important to think about the true value college provides. The other thing to keep in mind is that people who have college degrees, so when I say college degrees, I typically mean associate degrees, BAs, and also high-quality certificates and diplomas issued by community colleges, most typically, is that you're more likely to vote, you're less likely to be incarcerated, you're going to live longer, you're less likely to smoke, be engaged with it, you're also more likely to be engaged in your community. So all these sort of positive outcomes that we all seek are more common if you're a college graduate. A critical thing in the United States is that by 2020, 60% of all jobs in this country will require some kind of post-secondary credential. That is now a majority. 20 years ago, it was probably much less than a majority. So the world of work, for a variety of reasons related to technology and globalization, is changing dramatically. A college degree remains the silver bullet to help people get into the middle class and to get out of poverty. More negatively, though, of course, is the fact that there are still some attainment gaps for low-income people, particularly people of color, and that it's difficult for them to truly benefit from all the opportunities that our country can offer them. And so we see higher education as the best way to help low-income people get into the middle class and to flourish and thrive in their lives. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Bethany Miller, who's going to walk you through some data that we consider foundational to our thinking.
Thank you, Bill. Within higher education, we focus on specific populations, especially low-income students and students of color. We know that these students have not been traditionally well served by the higher education system, and their numbers are growing within that higher ed system. This chart shows how the gap is closing in regards to who enrolls in college. If you look at the bottom yellow line, you see that low-income students today who graduate from high school are enrolling in college at rates that approach and may even surpass middle-income students. This next chart comes from the New York Times and gets at another bit of data that shapes how we think about our work. And that is it's related to equity gaps around who graduates. As you can see, while college access is going up in all categories, the gap in graduation rates among wealth brackets continues to persist and widen. The challenge is that the poorest wealth group are still graduating at far lower rates than the other groups. And this chart, borrowed from our friends at the Lumina Foundation, makes the final point on which we approach our work, and that is the fact that racial equity remains a critical issue. While more students of color are entering college, the gaps in who graduates remains, especially when you compare whites to African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanic students. And now Bill will share how we apply that thinking to our strategy.
So as we've seen the arguments for college and why it's so valuable, and it's well worth the risk even with high costs. But we've also seen how while we've seen improvements in attainment and in enrollment in higher education, both here and in South Africa, there still is this challenge of attainment gaps. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the strategy that we have to address these challenges. First, our overarching goal remains, as it has been, to increase post-secondary attainment. But we also have added in our latest update the idea of eliminating attainment gaps for low-income students and students of color. Now, this again has been part of our focus for many years, but we want to make this an explicit commitment at the very top, because this is where we really need to focus in order to give as many people as possible the opportunities that higher education bestows on them. The second is that our niche as a funder is different from many of our post-secondary peers in a couple of ways. First, as I mentioned earlier, we come from a foundation that looks at arts and culture and at education and at a specific city like Detroit. That's one area. Another area that we're different is that we focus on both access and success. So we're looking at how do we get those students into college, and also how do we make sure that they succeed once they get there. We also have a strong focus on the effects of poverty on student outcomes. So these are areas in which we're a little different from some of our peers that we work with on a regular basis. Now, we have three strategies. The first one, Urban Pathways to College, focuses on students and on access to college. The second, Capacity Building for Success, focuses on institutions and on those institutions that serve our students mostly. And third, Urban Higher Education Ecosystems, which is looking at a cross-sectoral way in which a city might develop college attainment rates or increase college attainment rates locally. I'm going to go in a little deeper into each of these strategies now. But before I do that, I'd like to just now, as they say in South Africa, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why we work with cities and what that means for our team. Now, Kresge as a whole is focused on opportunity in cities, and we apply that framework in a number of ways. We know that cities can't be places of opportunity unless more people have access to complete a post-secondary degree. Second, Kresge also has a few focus cities in the United States: Memphis, New Orleans, and our hometown of Detroit. In those places, as well as major cities in our team's focus states of California, Florida, Michigan, and Texas, we might consider more of a place-based approach to the work and invest in projects that, for instance, might not be scalable nationally, but that work well in a localized context. And finally, one of our strategies in particular is all about making cities work better for low-income students. So let's talk first about urban pathways to college. This focuses, as I said, on college access for high school students who are 17 or 18 years old, about to graduate, and for returning adults. The high school student focus is there because there's always a new class of 18-year-olds who doesn't know how to apply to college, which is an increasingly difficult path to navigate, and who often, increasingly, are coming from they're the first in their family to go to college and coming from families with no real experience in higher education. So we need to figure out better ways to help them make the right choices about entering college. On the other side, we look at adults, older adults. There are about 35 billion older adults in the United States who have some college, no degree. With some college, no degree, they often have debt, but they don't have that credential that allows them to be compensated at a higher level in their jobs. So we want to see if there are ways in which we can get more of those students back into college to finish those degrees so they can tap into the opportunities that a higher income might yield for them. So there are a couple of ways, a couple of areas that we might fund, for example. We might look at how we could help K through 12 districts work more closely with the higher education institutions in their community so that they can have greater accountability and greater transitions to higher education. We also focus on long-term scalability and sustainability of effective college access organizations, including help with their business model so they can sustain themselves over time beyond just philanthropic support. We look also at capacity building to support the human capital that grantees rely on. We also explore improving college advising and leveraging the opportunity that's happening in South Africa, free college for all families earning less than 350,000 Rand per annum. Our second strategy is capacity building for student success, which is really focused on institutions. And in this one, we're really looking at how we can help build the student success capacity of the urban institutions that serve our students. These institutions typically are mission-focused on low-income, first-generation underrepresented students, community colleges, minority-serving institutions, public institutions. The challenge is not all of them do well by their mission. So how can we get more institutions to do better by their students? A couple of ways in which we think that could happen is we could look at things like focusing on networked efforts, getting a group of institutions in a whole community or a whole state or across the country to look at certain issues that we think would help them do better by their students. Maybe it's better advising. It might be using big data to better note where students are failing or succeeding. High impact practice, all the ways in which we know we've seen real success in many instances, but not all colleges have adopted that strategy yet. We'll also look to expand business models so that some of the colleges that are having challenges in their business model can figure out new ways to diversify and expand revenue for the institution. We're also looking at leadership development so we can get leaders that are more open to some of the innovations we're seeing in the 21st century, and also who are maybe more representative of the students they serve. And in South Africa, we're looking particularly at the fact that a number of higher education institutions are seeing a high level of turnover, and we'd like to make sure that the system is well served and that people are given adequate support to do their jobs well. Finally, I'd like to turn to our urban higher education ecosystem strategy. And this term, which we coined in 2015, is about a strategy that seeks to connect the many systems that students encounter on campus and off to ensure that students' needs are covered. Typically, you have a college of a technical difficulty, and I believe we dropped out for a moment. So I'm just going to go back to the urban higher education ecosystem, and I'll apologize if I'm repeating a little bit of myself, but just to make sure that we hear the whole thing. The urban higher education ecosystem is something that we coined in 2015, and this describes the idea that most low-income students go to college locally, and that they have to sort of navigate their own way through college. So there isn't often a good handoff from the K through 12 system to the post-secondary system. And unlike elite colleges and institutions where you might have, you'll be at a dorm, you have a cafeteria or a dining hall, you have faculty, you have academic advisors, you have career planning, you have all these support networks. That usually goes to the people who are have the greatest set of resources. Whereas we often take students who have the least resources and give them the fewest supports, and we tell them to go out on their own. So most notably, for example, in June, a high school senior has free and reduced lunch. In September, she does not have free and reduced lunch. So she literally has to find more calories to get through the day just a few months later than she did when she was in high school. So the idea here is, how could we get a whole city to support students, whether it's about housing or about food insecurity or about making a better transition from K through 12 to the community college or the four-year school, or transferring between those institutions? And how do we make sure that students are aware of the opportunities that businesses in their community may be offering? And how do we see if there's a way for government to be engaged, and for the nonprofit college access movement or human service agencies to all work together to see if we couldn't help students succeed? So what we do in this approach is we try to identify, support, and evaluate proof points that move the needle on student success. So this is a more experimental area, and we map systems to see where could we be working to improve investments in cities as emerging urban higher education ecosystem leaders. We also explore opportunities to leverage or align public funding to advance local college attainment. In South Africa, we're looking at how the University of Pretoria is working in downtown Pretoria in the Hatfield district and also out in Mamelodi to see how they could improve community development opportunities to enhance student success. Finally, we hope to work with our sister team, the Human Services team, to see if we couldn't have joint initiatives that might address issues of common concern to both teams. So now what I'd like to do is pass on the microphone to Bethany to talk about our work in more detail.
As Bill has referenced, the one area of the education team's grant making outside of the U.S. is in South Africa. The foundation has invested proactively in South African higher education since 2006. And it is the South Africans' national challenges, such as vast inequalities between the wealthy and the poor, a history of racism and white supremacy that resonates deeply and almost uniquely with our own nation's history and challenges. And South Africa's higher education challenges, lack of completion, student debt, increasing student diversity, student unrest tied to racist campus symbols, puts into high relief many of the same challenges faced by U.S. institutions. Our student success work, Siyaphumelela, has created a movement around student success in South Africa and helped to change the country's agenda on this topic. Developed in conjunction with university leaders and requiring student input and feedback, it has influenced national policy and is an example of how carefully long-term investments in capacity research and broad engagement can inspire and influence change. We'll continue to work in student success in South Africa going forward. We've told you a little bit about what we fund, so we think it makes sense to touch briefly on what we do not fund. We do not typically fund individuals, capital projects, scholarship programs, small-scale programs serving less than 500 students, projects at nonprofits with budgets less than $1 million, K-12 school reform efforts, charter schools, early childhood education efforts, or projects outside of the U.S. or South Africa. Now that we've covered what we fund and don't fund, we'll share a bit about what outcomes we'd like to see and how we work. Long-term, as Bill outlined, we expect to see increased post-secondary attainment with equity gaps eliminated for low-income students and students of color. In the near term, in the next 3 to 6 years, we hope this means, first, sustained and scaled college access approaches in cities. By that we mean all urban residents, both graduating high school students and adults with some college but no degree, benefit from access services, including FAFSA completion and advising, that enable a successful start or return to post-secondary education. Second, we hope to see more urban colleges and universities, especially minority-serving institutions, achieve greater than 50% graduation rates for all students due to their improved business models, greater student success capacity, and strategic collaborations with community partners. Third, we'd like to see additional proof points of thriving urban higher education ecosystems. And by that we mean more urban higher education institutions and other non-campus systems partnering to increase local students' graduation rates. And fourth and finally, we hope to see the deployment of multiple forms of capital. This could mean that through grants and social investments, Kresge has demonstrated the financial viability of nonprofits, social enterprises, and programs that contribute to greater college access and success. So now that you've heard a bit about our goals, our strategies, and our desired outcomes, let's walk through how we typically work with our partners. First, we begin our funding process by inviting an organization to submit a letter of inquiry. This is a 3 to 5 page overview of the program or project for which you seek funding. Typically, this is invite-only process, and at this time, we have no open calls for proposals. The next step, after our team reviews the LOI, we give feedback. In some cases, we will know at this point that we are not a match. If we do not move forward, we provide feedback and a rationale for that decision. If we do want to move forward, we give our input into what we hope to see in the proposal and any questions we would like answered. From there, you submit a full proposal, which is more tightly centered on exactly what the funding will be for, provides more details about the problem you are trying to solve, and includes things like a budget. Our team reviews this, and then after final back and forth, we write up a summary and share it with our executive team. The executive team then reviews, provides their feedback, and either approves the grant or asks for more information or clarification. Through this process, we routinely apply 4 filters. The first is alignment. To what extent does this opportunity align with our mission and our strategies? Second, impact. To what extent will this make a difference? To what extent will this increase the national attainment rate? Third, sustainability. To what extent will this work be sustained and continued beyond the grant period? And fourth, scale. At what scale will this make a difference? All in all, this process takes on average 6 to 8 months between the first conversation and the money being dispersed. A couple of quick facts about our general grant making. Our grants range from $50,000 to upwards of $1 million. And our grant period is typically 1 year to 3 years in length. The average grant size for our team currently is around $350,000. We grant about $20 million a year, give or take, depending on a number of factors, and that includes prior year commitments, meaning our total new budget for funding in any given year is often only around $11 to $12 million. As we mentioned before, we like to work with networks of institutions rather than individual campuses. We are also always looking for ways to partner with other Kresge program teams to find solutions at the intersection of sectors and issue areas. And finally, we also work with Kim and her social investing colleagues to find opportunities to make program-related investments. We know it can be frustrating to hear that we operate using an invite-only process. We hear you. We've heard you. We do things this way because we found in the past that our open calls for proposals were not leading to new partnerships, and we did not want to waste anyone's time. That said, we travel consistently and attend many conferences and meetings around the country that feature topics related to higher ed, and we welcome the opportunity for conversations at these venues. Here's a sampling of places you can typically find us. And with that, I'll transition it back to Krista to close us out.
Thank you, Bethany. So we're very happy so many of you could join us today, and we hope we can keep the conversation going with you. You can reach out to us and follow our work in a variety of ways. You can email us by going to kresge.org and clicking on Contact Us, which will bring you to the page you see listed here with the URL that says Email Us. And there you can find a form to fill out, which comes directly to us and that we monitor on a daily basis. Our home, the education team's home on the Kresge website, is the best place to learn about our funding priorities, and that's kresge.org/programs/education. And you can receive news and updates from our team every other month, in our program newsletter, Every Degree Matters, and sign up for that at bit.ly/Kresge EDU news, which is case sensitive, and you can see there. And watch for our next newsletter, which will be towards the end of August, and which will include the link to this recording and to the materials. At this time, that's our full presentation, and we have still about 30 minutes remaining, and we are excited to take your questions. So if you haven't had a time, we see there are some questions here already in the queue. If you haven't had time to type one in, or you can go right now over to the questions tab on the GoToWebinar interface and type your question in there. And sorry again for the technical issue we had earlier. We got quite a few comments about that, but I think we are all set now. Someone has asked if questions are seen only by the moderator, and yes, unless we choose to share them with the full audience, only we can see the questions. We've had a couple of questions about if we anticipate any open calls or LOI openings in the next year. So I know we don't have any at the moment and nothing on the near horizon. Bill, do you want to answer further on that?
Sure. Thanks, Krista. Yeah, we don't have a specific timeline right now, but we have a couple of opportunities that we think we may be looking at over the next year. In the United States, what we're thinking of is we may be looking at some joint work with our human services team to see if there might be a way for us to work together. So that may be something. There's also a possibility in South Africa of sort of a rejuvenation of our Siyaphumela work that might also open up additional opportunities for grants. The third way that sometimes happens as well is that we might make a grant to an organization that is running a program or an initiative on our behalf. And so we've just kind of missed it, but in the last several months we've had, or about the last 9 months, I guess, we've had two big opportunities. One was a national effort to improve developmental education called Strong Start to Finish, which was done in conjunction with the Gates Foundation and the Great Lakes Higher Education Corporation. And also we've been working with the National College Access Network to have a second round of FAFSA completion for a FAFSA completion challenge, which was national and also done in conjunction with Great Lakes Higher Education Corporation. Bethany has a couple of others that she wanted to suggest as well.
So I would just add one additional opportunity on the radars of the higher ed institutions who might be on the call. But we're currently investing in the Institute for Higher Education Policy to launch a large initiative called Degrees When Due. And this is aimed at scaling up reverse transfer and project win-win type strategies. In essence, strategies that advance degree reclamation, get students degrees that they would have earned, but for whatever reason were not actually conferred. So I would just direct you to the Institute for Higher Ed Policy. They're actively recruiting states and then institutions within states to join a set of cohorts to advance those strategies. If you'd like more information, reach out to the general information that Krista's listed or directly connect with IHEP, the Institute for Higher Ed Policy.
Great. We had one question about the where to find you in the field slide. It went by pretty fast, I realize. I'll put it back on the screen here so you can see the sampling of places that we listed. Again, we will share out the presentation so you'll be able to see that as well. And we also had a question about our target geographies. And if you're in, this is a question from someone who's in a large urban area, and they're wondering if they would be ineligible for support because that area is not one of our target cities. And the answer to that is no, that we do work nationally and especially are interested in things happening in large urban areas. So the focus states that we have and the focus cities, you know, they get a little bit more attention from us, but we are interested in efforts happening nationally as well as in South Africa. Anything you guys want to add more on that?
No, I think that basically if you're working on a regional basis or a statewide basis or a citywide basis, and you're trying to meet those 4 criteria of alignment and sustainability and scalability and
impact.
Thank you. You would certainly be a reasonable group for us to speak with.
And a question that is in a somewhat similar vein, and just how do we define urban? And we get this question quite a bit at Kresge because admittedly we have not issued a single foundation-wide definition of what we mean by that. So we do understand that that can be confusing. On our website, we do have a page that talks about why Kresge invests in cities. Bill, would you like to share a little bit more?
Well, basically what we mean is we don't mean rural. And so, you know, we're looking at cities. Some of the cities may be very traditional in the physical sense of how they're laid out and what they look like, a city like New York City or San Francisco. But in many cases, they may be sort of new cities. The Inland Empire in Southern California, which isn't all that new, but it doesn't have a traditional downtown in the same way that you might think of as a city in Ohio or in Massachusetts. So I think the idea is if you're in the top 100 MSAs or cities, there would be no doubt about it. Top 200, maybe it would probably be okay. But what doesn't work is a small town, unfortunately. And we typically also wouldn't look at, say, a relatively large suburban community as a city. We'd probably be looking at the metropolitan area. So, you know, St. Louis Metro would be fine, but a suburb 15 miles from the center of St. Louis, probably not sufficiently urban or large to meet sort of our criteria, which are admittedly a little bit vague, but we like that so that we have a chance to talk to communities that we may not know yet.
Great. Okay, a question here about our K-12 relationships. So someone says that we mentioned we don't fund K-12 reforms. They're wondering if we could talk a little bit more about the types of projects we have funded that are in a K-12 environment.
Well, I can start us off and then would encourage Bill to add on to what I share. But typically how we've supported work sort of adjacent to or in partnership with K-12 has really been about the transition from high school into college. So we have supported a host of really best-in-class nonprofits, some of which come to mind like College Spring or Families in Schools, that help families and students make that transition from high school into college. So helping with things like SAT and ACT prep, helping with things like acculturating or informing parents about what that transition looks like. We've also invested heavily in thinking about the kind of college advising that happens either as nonprofit providers or increasingly K-12 schools do around the college transition process. And moving forward, I think we're interested in continuing to explore how those nonprofit partners can partner with districts to deliver those critical services within school districts. So I'll end there and turn it over to Bill if he wants to add anything else.
I think that's a great summary. I think one challenge with the sort of college access work is that traditionally that work was philanthropically supported. And what we're trying to do is to try to ensure that that work is sustainable beyond just philanthropic support, because it's very difficult for any even very effective nonprofits that work in this space to scale if they are purely funded by foundations. We think it's important for them to become embedded into higher education or to the K-12 transition system. One, if you're in California, a couple of things that we have funded that may be useful to you is we did fund something called California College Guidance Initiative, the CCGI, which is designed to create a dossier of students to prepare them for that transition from college. And it starts relatively early and collects test scores and classes and career interests, and then helps that student refine their interests so they're better prepared to go to college. And that was really, again, to look at the issue that Bethany mentioned, which is the lack of sufficient numbers of college or high school advisors advising on college. And so the idea there is to provide an electronic boost to that engagement by human beings.
Great. Sorry, just one second. The next question is that, Bill, you had mentioned high impact student success strategies at one point. And the question here is if you could just give any examples of what kind of practices those are.
Sure. So high impact practices is something that you hear a lot from the AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities. So I'd definitely recommend you just go there and type in high impact practices. But some of them include things like undergraduate research. They include things like first-year experiences. And one of the things that's interesting about, say, a first-year experience is that when we say first-year experience, we mean something very specific. It's a certain set of supports and engagements to help students succeed and make that transition from high school to college, not just it was their first year and they had an experience, but more that there was something thoughtfully prepared to help ensure that transition is successful. So I would look at the AAC&U and look at some of those practices, and that's really what we're trying to support with the high impact practices.
I can add a couple additions to what we really emphasize here on the team. And I think we take a lot of cues from our colleagues at Georgia State University, because they are one of the few universities who's increased their graduation rates by double digits over a 10-year period and have eliminated any race-based inequities. And so some of the things that we really look for and that Georgia State has implemented are things like using data analytics to understand where students flounder and then to embed interventions there to address those barriers that they're experiencing. Another is proactive advising, so how to make sure that students know how to navigate the higher ed system and succeed in it. The last is innovative financial aid, thinking about different ways of mobilizing institutional resources to meet the financial needs of students. So that's a flavor. So I think in addition to the resource Bill pointed you out, definitely look up Georgia State University, and those are the kind of things that we're hoping to see more widely scaled within the higher ed field.
Great, and here's just a quick one that I will answer, and that's whether the $20 million we referenced earlier was the total giving for Kresge work or simply education. That is just the education team's budget. The foundation itself, through all of our programs and practices, is investing around $150 million a year. And then the next question, I'm sorry, just one moment. If we can offer some successful examples of the networks around the country that we're funding.
Sure. Generally speaking, what we're looking for are networks of like-minded institutions that are trying to improve either college access or college success. So one organization is the National College Access Network, which is a group of statewide and local college access organizations that get together and try to use best practices to improve the number or increase the number of students who actually go to college and to enhance their ability to succeed once they get there. So you can look up the National College Access Network and get a good feel for that. Another one that we look at quite significantly is Achieving the Dream, which is a network of about 200 or so reform-minded community colleges that are looking at what are often very low attainment rates and graduation rates in community colleges and trying to figure out why that's occurring and to try to reverse that and to make sure that those improvements are available to all of their students. A third network that we've worked with quite a bit is something called the University Innovation Alliance, which is 11 public universities that across the country that are working to try to increase attainment at their institutions. And they've set a very specific numerical goal for the number of students that they hope to see graduate over time, over and above what the trend line was for them. And so that includes Georgia State University, University of Central Florida, the Arizona State University, UC Riverside, which are some of the leading institutions in the United States at improving student success. A fourth group is in South Africa. We've worked with the Siyaphumelela Network, which is 5 universities in South Africa promoting student success. That's the University of Pretoria, the University of Witwatersrand, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, University of the Free State, and I'm missing one institution. I will remember it later. But there are 5 institutions in the Siyaphumelela network, and they're all working together and sharing data and sharing information so they can really try to get the entire higher education system in South Africa to improve student success.
As a small coda to that, because I think that represents really excellently some of the major networks we work with, I will hold out that we do work with more of the traditional membership associations of higher education as they aim to help move their institutions to a student success focus. So the Association of Public and land-grant universities as a grantee. We've had partnerships with the American Association of Community Colleges, and that will give you a flavor.
And with my memory lapse, it was Durban University of Technology is the fifth university in the CULA network.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from folks asking for examples of prior projects that we funded. A question somewhat related about projects we funded where we are co-funding with other teams, so where have we found intersections with other Kresge program teams. And another question about if we funded research. So these are all just kind of examples of things we funded. We have funded some research. So do you guys want to give a couple of examples of the kinds of work we've done?
I can give one that gives an example of how we've both funded research and funded with other teams, so hit both questions with one example. One area of overlap and potential exploration for continued partnership with our human services team is around issues of food and housing insecurities. And we've learned through some actual direct research that we've funded that the prevalence of food insecurity and housing insecurity is much higher than I think people outside of community colleges or public 4 years would have realized, but those of you in the trenches probably knew all along. So we did that initial basic research to understand the prevalence of the problem in partnership with our human services team. And now as a sequel investment with them, we are actually looking at evaluating through randomized controlled trials some interventions to address that basic food insecurity and housing insecurity of students. And that has been through a partnership with Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Rabb. So that's sort of an example of how we fund both research, both basic research to sort of understand a problem, as well as more evaluative research to understand what solutions work and how we've done that in partnership with our human services team. As I've talked, I'm sure Bill has figured out some other examples to raise up, so I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, a couple of things. On research, we've done a number of different things, and a lot of our grants involve research components and also implementation. So for example, we've done a lot of research over the years on developmental education, on the causes of developmental education and what engagements are most effective at improving that. And that's actually led to a series of solutions on developmental education relating to using, sort of leaving behind the idea of Algebra 2 and looking at quantitative literacy and also statistical literacy. And we've done that through the Carnegie Foundation, the advancement of teaching. We've also worked with the Dana Center at the University of Texas on their new mathways, and through the Complete College America and their work on co-requisites. So this sort of, we began with research and then ended up with solutions that have been demonstrably proven to be very effective. Another area that we've worked on that's been important to us, or a couple of other areas, have been things like predictive analytics. We've worked with University of Maryland, University College, where what we've done is they took more than 1.5 billion data points and have been able to determine with about an 85% or 80% certainty level how well students will succeed when they get to the University of Maryland, University College, when they've transferred from some community colleges in metropolitan Washington, D.C. And this, again, has helped us to figure out what, if you know what is going to help the student succeed or fail, or their likelihood of success or failure, what interventions might you then inject into your system to change the outcome, especially, of course, if it's negative. Another one is we've looked at things on the policy side on things like big data and the use of big data and the ethical use of big data. So we've worked with the New America Foundation to look at how you use big data ethically. I think, as we all know, big data is a double-edged sword. We don't want to destroy people's privacy, but we also don't think it's appropriate to leave on the table facts and knowledge that you have that would help students succeed if you knew enough about how students with that profile typically have fared. So we're trying to figure out ways in which we can support universities to do this kind of work more effectively and more ethically. So I think the bottom line here is when you're looking at things like research projects, we're looking at research that is designed to help us figure out how we can get more students into college, or even more likely, how we can help students to actually succeed. And we've done some evaluations as well on, what's the best way to promote FAFSA completion. When we did the talent dividend, where we had a prize that we gave to the city that most improved the number of locally produced college graduates, what were any particular markers that distinguished communities that were very effective at this from cities that were not as effective. So we're always looking at ways in which we can be more effective in the way we spend our generous budget, but relatively limited budget, and we want to do that more effectively. As far as joint grants with other teams, we've done a couple of grants with, most often with our human services team, because they often have similar interests in the similar kinds of populations. In years past, we don't do this so much anymore, but we used to support a lot of green building and sort of greening campuses, and that was the way that we saw reducing costs for higher education. We did that with our environmental team, which focuses on climate change. We've worked in Detroit to promote things like the Detroit College Access Network, and to try to do a better job of supporting our hometown and its ability to get high school students and high school graduates to complete FAFSAs. So those would be some examples of what we've done with other teams.
Great. We have about 10 minutes left. We have a lot of questions in the queue. We will try to get through these as quickly as we can. I had one that just, I'm sorry, where did that go? Someone asked whether what we're talking about here applies only to this education program and how they can find out about other programs. We are speaking pretty specifically about our funding strategies and processes, and other teams will certainly have different strategies and might even employ slightly different processes. If you're interested in funding that you think fits more squarely in one of the other programs, we do keep our website really up to date on what our current strategies are. We have a page on the website called Current Opportunities, where you can see where there are open portals. Some of our other teams do work with open calls, and so we always put those opportunities there. So I would just urge you to dive deep into our website and reach out to us through the Contact Us page if you have further questions. And we had a question also about the 500 that we're looking to work with things that are scaled, and we had mentioned, I think, that are bigger than about a 500 student number. Can we just give any more nuance on that? Is that a hard and fast line that we wouldn't consider anything below that?
So I guess the first thing I would say is that we have occasionally funded things that are smaller than that, but typically they are a pilot effort that is designed to serve a broad community or a broad network of institutions from the very start. So what wouldn't be particularly appealing is, say, a pilot on a single campus about that single campus with a sort of vague assertion that someday we hope it will be taken over by other people too. What would work is that there is a decision by a number of institutions, along with a major, say, evaluation firm, to explore some intervention at one campus first, and then to take it to 3, which have already been identified, and then to 10. You know, where it's an obvious, clear plan, with the idea that if it didn't work in the first campus, they'd probably stop. Whereas if it did work in the first campus, they'd then move to the second series of campuses, and then the much more broadly. Because what we really are trying to do is scale very effective interventions, and to try to do that obviously with as many places as we can. And so focusing on a single institution, and where we make exceptions to single institutions is if they are doing something truly remarkable, like Georgia State, or if they have such a large size or unique status in the United States that they can play an important role. Miami-Dade College, the largest community college in the country, which is located in Miami, or Arizona State University, which is the single largest R1 university, or Southern New Hampshire University, which is actually not a grantee, but is an example. It's the kind of institution that has a unique role in online education. So that's what we typically look at, as opposed to a great small liberal arts college that would like to do better by its students. We would rather work with a group of you rather than a single institution.
Okay, great. Here's another question about where do we see policy advocacy or coalitions within our strategies to increase college access, retention, and completion, especially for low-income or foster youth or young men opposed to certain populations that might have particular needs?
So once again, I'll start and then Bill, please add on. But we do actively support policy and advocacy work, especially at the national and state levels, that are tightly tied with our mission of increasing post-secondary attainment with a focus on eliminating equity gaps. So we have a cadre of national and state level at policy advocacy groups that we support. I've already mentioned one on this call, the Institute for Higher Ed Policy. Others include Ed Trust, Excellencia, the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS, and I would say with at least two of the ones that I've held up, but all of them actually share an emphasis on equity. Ed Trust and Excellencia have really led the way in thinking about some of the populations of color that the questioner asked about, and so we do think that is critically important and have supported it through our nearly decade of grant making. Bill?
I'd just add that we don't do a lot of advocacy organizations. This is not because we don't think it's important, but because we just have limited funds. So we tend to focus institutions that have specific knowledge about critical areas related to post-secondary access and success. So, for example, TICAS is probably the most effective institution on issues directly relating to financial aid policy and to certain kinds of rules related to how for-profit colleges are governed by the United States. We also look at statewide policy issues through our student success centers, which are about promoting student success at community colleges, and that's a network of about a dozen or so centers that is done in conjunction with the Gates Foundation. So we work with that. Where we probably wouldn't work as, say, an organization that has a very broad mission or a very specific mission that's relatively far away from our core students. And we would probably not support that kind of advocacy just because it's valuable, but it's not as close to the center of what we do, and we don't do a lot of advocacy organization support.
Okay, just a couple more. There was a question about whether we focus on graduate schools or programs. I think broadly the answer to that is no, that we're focused on helping the populations that we care about really get to an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, and we have not focused on graduate programs. There's a question on if capacity building for student success is more focused on activities at the higher ed level, or if programs that better prepare youth of low income to get into college. And I think what we've recently sort of made a little clearer is that we want to work in the capacity building strategy that is focused on mainly on higher ed institutions. Is there anything else you guys want to?
I would say that on some of the college access organizations, we are trying to build their capacity again to be more financially independent and to be more effective with data. But this again is that transition to college. So we're not building the capacity of high performing high schools or high performing charter schools or school districts. We're building the capacity of the transition to college, usually for organizations that are very, very effective at that. We would also look at building the capacity perhaps of a convening agency or entity in a city. So maybe there's the XYZ city college attainment network, and it brings together all the various groups that we think are critical to trying to improve local college attainment. We might try to build their capacity as well.
And so just to explicitly link that to the strategy buckets that we outlined to you, the first category of increasing the capacity of nonprofit providers who are helping with the transition from high school to college would be in our Urban Pathways to College portfolio. And the example of building the capacity of conveners, backbone organizations, facilitators within communities who create the tables for that kind of community level efforts would fit in our urban higher education ecosystem strategy.
We only have a couple minutes left, and we've had quite a few questions that are kind of in the theme of, we do great work, how do we get it on your radar when you don't have open calls? And noting that we are out in the field a lot at conferences, is there anything you can say just about how other people have come in through the door that might give people a sense of how that has worked for us in the past?
So we make grants all the time to people we've never made grants to before. So this is not a closed shop with 20 grantees that are just lucky enough to have been selected. One way is I would strongly encourage you, if you are active in the kind of areas that we work, you should be active nationally. You should be going to those conferences for your own professional development and also to engage with others to strengthen your ability to serve your students. And that's where we typically see a lot of colleagues and peers, and we might be at a breakfast, we might be at a panel where people are asking questions. We might, people might ask us if they'd like to have, if we have time for an appointment. Now, you know, the day before we get to the conference, there may be no appointment time left, but that's often how we have engaged with people in the past. The other thing is I would get on to the kind of indicators that make sure that you're following what we're doing, so that when we announce all the RFPs that we're doing or we're associated with, because we want to make sure that as many people as possible are applying. So I would pay close attention to us. Follow our Twitter handle also, because that's another way in which to get in there. I think Bethany may have some other ideas you may want to employ.
So we do, as we outlined, or Krista directed you, if you do contact us through the Kresge website, that does come to an inbox that is monitored on a daily basis, and we have a staffer on our team reviewing those for potential alignment. And in the case that they are well aligned with our mission, our strategies, our priority geographies, we reach out to you to schedule an introductory call. So a great deal of my time is spent on first-time calls with new potential grantees, and so we'll reach out. So definitely use that if you think you're well aligned with us, and if we can see that alignment evident from your email, we'll reach out to schedule an introductory call.
Well, that is all the time that we have. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of the questions, but we do have them here, and we will follow up if we can as appropriate. So we just want to thank you. Again, look for an email, which will include the link to this recording and the materials, and also sign up for our newsletter, which will be coming at the end of August, and we'll also include this link as well as much more about what the team has been up to. And again, sorry for the technical problem in the middle there. We do apologize. And enjoy your weekend. Thank you.